Hi, Wendy and Tammy, Miranda, Melissa.
We couldn't hear you there for a minute, but we can hear you now.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Wanted to make sure that it connected all right.
I think it was on our end. We haven't done a Zoom in a while, so we're
Oh,
out there.
wow. Just going to give it another 2 minutes. We have a couple people coming in from the waiting room. And for those who are muted, you can also use the chat feature if you would like. That's on the bottom. You could enter anything into the chat if you have questions or comments or are not able to unmute, or if you're calling in as well. So I do have 1 o'clock, so I'm actually going to get started. I'll keep an eye if anybody else is in the waiting room to be able to admit. And so I'm just going to do a screen share. It does have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be going along with today. And I'm going to start the screen share. And if somebody could, perhaps Tammy or Wendy, give me a thumbs up to let me know that the screen share is working all right, then we'll know that we are good to go on that. So let me just go into that share screen. Wonderful. So do we have the PowerPoint that you're able to see now, where it says zoom into a more stress-free year? Excellent. Thank you so much. There we go. And I just made it full screen now. Okay, so for today, we're going to be discussing some strategies and techniques in burnout prevention, which at the start of the new year, I know is kind of a very hot topic that a lot of people like to think about. Certainly hoping that 2023 will be a wonderful year for everyone. And so I think this is a great time of year to kind of look at this topic and do a little bit of a reset in terms of strategy and techniques in burnout prevention. So an overall kind of how can we turn stress into wellness for 2023? So during this afternoon Zoom, we are going to recognize that stress is inevitable. However, burnout is preventable. We are going to explore what is called a 15 minutes a day plan, as well as stay interviews, and a new way to look at a work-life balance. So if your goal is to turn stress into wellness in 2023, that's what we're hoping to accomplish today for a more stress-free year. So a little bit of who I am. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carrie Strauss. I have my own consulting business and I love working with different people and organizations. Prior to consulting, I served for 10 years as the first ever executive director of United Way of Bradford County. And prior to that, I was the volunteer center program manager for another United Way after I served 2 years in the AmeriCorps program. I truly have a passion for the community, building strong communities and partnerships, and I have my master's degree in social work. So to zoom into a more stress-free year, I'd like to ask an open-ended question, kind of a, what if you could change any one thing about your daily routine, what would it be and why? And if anybody would like to unmute themselves to share, they can, or you can also mention in the chat if that's easier. If you could change one thing about your routine, your daily schedule. I see someone mention less meetings. Any other comments that people have? If you could have less meetings, maybe that would be a little bit easier. Less things on
More
the to-do
coffee.
list. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
More coffee.
More coffee. That's a good one too. Thank you. So some of these, things, oh, we have another one. Getting up so early in the morning, arguing with kids to get ready for school. That's another one too. That's great. So the waking up early in the morning, but not arguing with kids to get ready for school would certainly be a helpful way to start the day. And of course, a less stress-free way to start the day. So we're going to examine a little bit more about overall burnout, um, and stress. And so if this, there we go, burnout will advance. The World Health Organization does define burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic stress that has not been successfully managed. And what I want to note here is the word not successfully managed. So today we're going to explore where we're at and where we can improve to become more successfully able to manage. And so this idea of kind of, we all have a lot of things that we're juggling every day, the waking up early, the kids, the busy schedules, the lots of meetings. And perhaps, this idea that I'm going to present with you today is that stress is inevitable. We're not going to avoid stress. That's certainly a part of life. But even though stress is inevitable, burnout itself is preventable. So how many of us feel like this, running on E a lot of times? Truly exhaustion, or maybe dreading work, or dreading what may be on your schedule for that day. Sometimes feeling like you're just beyond exhausted, maybe drowning. Sometimes could lead to trouble sleeping. For some people, may lead to depression. And this feeling of just overall being empty from time to time. So the important thing to remember is that it doesn't have to be permanent, and we can work on ways, to ensure that we're not getting into routines that make the stress become burnout, become permanent. And so this slide is very complicated, but I think it's very important because it shows how burnout really affects the brain. So it's very complicated, but the basics for it is that burnout, being first coined in 1974 by Herbert Freudenberger, referred to chronic psychosocial stress. So burnout can destroy ambition and a sense out worth. It can cause fatigue and even depression. However, the important concept on this slide is that stress does not cause burnout. And I'll say that again, stress does not cause burnout. It's stress plus inadequate support resources that causes burnout. So when the demands of the job outweigh the resources to cope, that's when burnout is likely. And you can apply that to other areas too, the demands of your day, of your calendar, of your schedule, of, perhaps of your family in general. If that outweighs the resources that are available to cope, that's when burnout is likely. Stress can come from a demanding work schedule, bad management, a toxic work environment, unfair treatment and compensation, and the list may go on and on. But it certainly affects us socially, physically, emotionally, mentally, all areas. So the key, though, in defining this burnout is whether it's chronic. If it's not successfully managed, it's more likely to become chronic. And exploring this and kind of looking at some of the details on this slide and how it affects the brain, it's definitely given me some peace of mind in knowing that there are ways that we can change it and it's not inevitable. So stress is always present, but just finding ways to incorporate resources to be able to cope. Next, I want to share one of my favorite quotes, which is, "The bad news is time flies. The good news is you're the pilot," by Michael Alschuler. And this is a really terrific quote, because I feel that if you only have one takeaway from today, please let it be this, that you are the pilot. You are in charge of your life. No one else will, can, or should. You're the one who's in control. And so, it's really to look at that positive mindset and to ensure that, we're taking the steps that we can to try to ensure that the good news is we are the pilot and we're in control of our lives. So some tips for managing stress and how we can ultimately have this lead to be a burnout prevention. We can, of course, look at a daily evaluation. I find this to be super helpful. Short-term and long-term goals, and plans, and how to make sure that we're measuring them to achieve those short-term and long-term goals. I find it helpful to write it down so it's not just something that's said, especially around this time of the year when there's like a New Year's resolution, like, oh, I want to do whatever XYZ this year. Write it down. I think it helps to have those short-term and long-term goals. A positive mindset, 100%. We get way, way farther along with positivity than we do with negativity. And a commitment for continuing education. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people look at, if they graduated from high school, oh, I'm done with education, or they maybe went on to college and now I have my degree, I'm finished with education. And I like to say that we should all continually strive for education. And there's so many resources now, not even in terms of like formal classes that people, may consider taking, but the informal education, like on YouTube, learning, taking, sharing, whatever it may be, that something that you're looking to do to grow either personally or professionally, to commit to that continuing education. And so these are all ways, to definitely look to try to manage that stress. And I encourage people too to look at an appropriate length of time. And this is different for everyone. For some people, like a 30-day, 60-day, maybe a 90-day goal or plan is appropriate. And so I think you really just, or it could be a year, it really just has to be what you feel comfortable with to make it your own. So whatever you pick, the fact that you just make those goal setting, and have that positive mindset, work on that continuing education, and just to have that plan and that you make it your own, and look for those long-term goals with benchmarks along the way. A piece of advice, too, with this, and came from calmstage.com with stress management, is to remember to breathe, sleep, socialize, and exercise. I love this slide, this calm stage slide, because it really does remind us that in order to look at all aspects of stress management, that we have to look at the things that that we need to do every day. And part of that can be, in part, the sleeping appropriate amount of hours of what's good for you for that night. Getting in that amount of socialization that you need every day, remembering to breathe and exercise, and the breathe exercise component can be as simple as, going for a walk or taking 20 minutes away from the computer. But incorporating those ways, in your day to be able to manage that. And the other piece is the 4 A's to cope with stress. So avoid, alter, adapt, and accept. This, I think, is wonderful, very helpful. Avoid at all costs, whenever you can, the unnecessary stress. Can be hard to do, but for some of us, if we haven't examined what areas that we can even avoid the unnecessary stress, we may not be looking for ways that we can. And so I think just to look at that short-term and long-term, kind of what are the unnecessary things that perhaps we can avoid. Things that we can't avoid, look to alter any stressful situation, adapt where you can't avoid or alter, and finally accept the things that you can't change. And these 4 techniques, as we work on our short-term and long-term plans, over time will definitely result in less stress and ultimately prevent a full-on burnout. I believe, too, that in our culture, we kind of have this like saying of when we greet each other and we ask people how we're doing, is kind of like it's almost become like a cultural thing to kind of brag about how much is on our to-do list or how busy we are. And ultimately, that's just pretty toxic to be able to respond that way, and to be encouraged, I think, to respond that way, that, oh, I'm so stressed, I have so much on my plate, too much to do, not enough time. That it's much better instead if we're able to truly analyze this ourselves of how we can alter the stress that we have to prevent burnout, but to also not encourage it with other people too. And so some other tips with that is to generally best to avoid, when at all possible, too high stress days. So we all know these days when we look at our calendar and we go, wow, I have so many appointments, so many things on my list for one day. How am I going to do it all? Or I'm looking ahead at the next week and wow, I really see that Monday and Tuesday next week are going to be so busy. These may be the 2 high stress days in the week. Try to avoid those as much as you can in a row. But to build the week around it so that there's not multiple, you certainly don't want all 5 days being high stress days. So avoid the 2 high stress days back to back as much as possible. And then also generally try to avoid not having 2 days of the no exercise, no downtime, no adequate sleep, those overall prioritizing yourself. Try not to go 2 days back to back without doing that. So if you had a night you had to stay up late and we're not able to sleep enough, try to make sure that the following night you're definitely able to then get enough sleep. And that will definitely help in minimizing the amount of stress. And then to build in planning time whenever possible. I found, for example, Microsoft Teams to be really helpful. Teams really helps you see when you do have those schedules coming in where you're not having enough downtime. Teams also helps if you're able to add to your calendar the built-in like 20 minutes of catching up on emails, or a 20-minute break, or a 40-minute planning session. And so through Microsoft Teams, it can be a helpful tool to use, or it's not a platform similar, to be able to build in those times where you're actually carving out time to do things that you want to build into your schedule for the day. So you're not just go, go, go all day long. And then, to truly keep it in perspective and try to, again, look at the short term and long term, and what things it is that you want to change individually to work on, and then to measure, have those benchmarks along the way. So some more helpful tips, and overall to turn the stress into wellness, is this work-life balance. And, part of that I think is that we work with a purpose. We all want to have days where we feel that we are working, and not just with our jobs, but also personally, that we really have a purpose for what we're doing. And part of that, I think, in personally and professionally, can come from kind of doing a job analysis where we can analyze and eliminate or delegate these unnecessary tasks, ways that we can manage our time, that we can really take control of what we want to do in a day. And an important piece to this, too, I really think does come from the exercise, and that can be as simple as a fresh air walk to be able to regroup and just evaluate kind of this balance of what it is that you're looking to do. Nobody really gets that far ahead when they're just plugging away at the computer and they've kind of hit that wall and they think they need to work through it. Instead, if you take that exercise, you take that break time away, you find that it ends up helping to clear the brain and then do the work more productively. And so another piece too, I just want to incorporate is the iron sharpens iron concept. I think this is really important to be able to surround yourself with other people that you think are going to be able to help you. And if you are able to get a mentor, or if you're in a situation to be a mentor, these two can be found to be very helpful. And there are times in life where maybe you want both, to have a mentor and be a mentor, but just to remember that iron sharpens iron. And these are ways that we can help ourselves and help other people. And so an analysis piece, a lot of people have heard of the SWOT analysis. I like to use the SOAR analysis. It's fairly similar to the SWOT analysis, although the strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results in SOAR, SOAR, does create a more positive analysis than the SWOT. And so a SOAR analysis, I've gone through this individually, I've gone through this with organizations. It's really helpful, again, in looking at those short-term and long-term goals, but to look at what are the strengths, what are the current opportunities, what are the future opportunities, what's the aspirations, either for yourself or for your organization, and what results are you looking for? And so I think this can be a helpful tool to be able to analyze what can help with your work and produce more results. It can be applied to your organization, your company, yourself, etc. And so I do think this is a helpful tool. Another tool I found to be helpful is what's called a stay interview. If you've heard of the concept of an exit interview, is, typically when somebody's leaving a job and their supervisor will ask, kind of like what went wrong. It's usually facilitated by HR. It's the actual, like, the end of the road. It's the exit interview. And the stay interview really gives the opposite side to this. So it's kind of learning what motivates people to stay, what keeps you engaged, what things do you like about, yourself, your personal goals, your organization, where you work. And so again, these can be applied to either individually or to an organization, but the concept is that it's really like a stay interview. What does it take? What motivates us to stay? What's going right? What is it that we're happy about? And so I think this purely help boost employee morale too. I've used it in different settings to even just to show groups of people, that you care enough. You want to look at ways to be more efficient and effective. It helps reduce staff turnover. It shows value and appreciation. And it also, like I said, it can help yourself individually if you're looking at what it takes to stay, what it takes to be happy. And so I think this is another successful piece that we may be able to use if you haven't heard the concept of a stay interview over an exit interview. And so I'm going to pause for some quick question and answer type session. If there's anything that's standing out to you right now, if there's any questions that anybody has on anything, and I'll stop a screen share so we're able to see each other. And then I just have one or two more resources that I wanted to be able to share with you today, and then we'll go into our final Q&A. So does anybody have anything that they would like to share? Any questions, anything that you came today really hoping to be able to discuss when we're discussing this overall stress into wellness, burnout prevention? And I'll keep an eye on the chat too, if anybody would like to type it into there. Feel free to chime in still on the chat if you'd like, but I will share the resource that I wanted to mention. There's eosworldwide.com. EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. I've recently found this site and I wanted it to be able to share as a resource to people because it has some terrific ideas, including a clarity break and a 3-3-1 plan, which is where you list the 3 most important things for the day, 3 most impactful things that you plan to do that day, and an overall I am statement. And I think the point, I guess, of this concept of a 3-3-1, it's something I'm going to play around with to see how it works as well. But I think the important thing with resources like this is that whatever you decide to use, the point is to try to just find something and try it and, you know, stick with it for a couple weeks, a couple months, see how it goes. Of course, alter and adapt to what fits into your schedule and maybe, you know, most helpful to you and what it is that you're looking for. But the important part is to not wait and to actually start now. And now is a great time, you know, being January and the start of the year, it's a great time for people that are looking to perhaps, you know, enter a year of if they've felt stressed in the past and, you know, to want to work on overall burnout prevention. I think this is a great time. No time like the present, but to start that. So I wanted to be able to share that resource with you. It's eosworldwide.com. And if there's no other comments or suggestions, I'll just, I guess maybe just pause. Let me check the chat again just to see if anybody put anything in. Yeah, I'll go also now to open Q&A if anybody has any questions or anything that you found helpful as well in working through your own ways of stress management that you'd like to share if you think it would be helpful for other people to hear. We'll just take a minute to let anyone share. You can feel free to unmute or put a message in the chat. I do see one message in the chat, advice to give on what can be done or when doing staff meetings to address stress and negativity amongst the staff, especially with how staffing patterns and being overworked. I think that's definitely an important one, and a lot I've seen a lot of this past year or two. So I think in part, and you're asking more specifically for staff meetings, I think in part what I see that works the best with this is for everyone, senior management, CEO, every staff member to have a positive mindset. And I know that's hard to do, but I think that the negativity does breed within organizations. And when people hear other staff being negative or they're frustrated, you know, it's way more likely to spread. And you're definitely alluding to that the stress and negativity amongst the staff becomes a pattern and that people feel overworked. I'm assuming they probably also feel underappreciated and undervalued. And so I would strongly say that in that sort of a setting for the staff meeting, whoever's running that meeting has to have that positive mindset. They have to address that and say, you know, this negativity has to end. We're all together as a team, you know, asking people individually what it would take for them to stay, to be happy. And also hopefully for them to recognize what the organization means to them and just kind of have this overall goal of working together. But I think it has to be led with negativity and addressing those things if possible to prevent those patterns from getting worse. And I understand that some of it's really tricky if you are short-staffed and people are being overworked because there's not more staff, but a plan would have to be put in place for, you know, how to recruit more staff or how to retain the staff that you have. And I hope that that's helpful. Other people can chime in if they'd like. But I think that it has to be a precedence that's set within the organization and within the staff members who are running that meeting, and then to try to do everything possible to curtail that negativity. So it's not just something that's perpetually happening every day, and especially that management, for example, is supporting or is a part of, because unfortunately I've seen that a lot too, where they assume the negativity is amongst, staff members, but perhaps not management, but in reality, it can end up being amongst management as well. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add with that, or comments or further questions to share related to that topic? And I do see a comment now too. Any ideas for team building activities? Yes. I think and it's really hard to say in general without knowing a specific organization. And I'm trying to recall, you might be from a fairly large nonprofit organization. It may depend on the number of employees, but one piece that's kind of a non-traditional team building activity I find helpful is to encourage the person, as you mentioned, in that whoever's running the staff meeting. So if it's a manager and they have 10 employees, I'm just going to make some assumptions, to do one-on-one meetings with each of those 10 employees and to go through essentially that concept of a stay interview. But to openly discuss, like, what are the strengths? What are the areas of improvement? To ask employees, what would they like to see improved? If they could have a magic wand and change one thing about their day, what would it be? And so I always encourage everyone to do those meetings individually. They can be as short as 20 minutes with each employee. That's enough time to be effective to gather the information that's needed. But then at the end of that, after each person is met individually one-on-one, there should definitely be a group meeting that's also held. And that can be the launch of the team building exercise, to be able to have an activity to say, okay, this is what I've heard. This is what everyone says. You have to kind of form a consensus of what everybody collectively is, what changes they're willing to make, what changes maybe the organization can offer. What incentives, some of them don't have to even cost any money. They can be fun things like employee recognition, a staff shout out that's once a week. Can be something as simple. I've seen like $5 dandy gift cards being, like a small incentive prize, but it doesn't even have to be like an actual gift card sort of thing. It can just be a public recognition, like a shout out that's given to employees, and that people feel appreciation. And so I think those are different ways to do some of the team building. I'm certainly offline here outside of the Zoom. I'm willing to work with any organization, particularly if you're facing certain challenges or, depending on the size and the complexity of what the situation might be, I might be able to offer some more specifics. But those just offhand are some of the general ones that I've seen that have worked really effective within a lot of smaller organizations. Any other comments, suggestions, questions? Well, I'm going to stop our recording here. We are approaching 1:30 and my Zoom has a 30 to 40 minute Zoom session. So I'm going to hit the stop record. That way I don't lose everyone. And then we'll just go